The sleek, muscular form of an adult leopard materialized at the crest of the ridge, its amber eyes, ancient and knowing, scanning the vast expanse of the African mountains. A sudden gust of wind ruffled its rosette-patterned fur, a silent testament to the raw, untamed power it exuded. For a fleeting moment, it stood silhouetted against the fiery hues of the setting sun, a magnificent phantom. Then, with a fluid grace that defied its bulk, it melted back into the tangled shadows, leaving behind only the lingering echo of its wild presence. But this formidable creature was more than just a predator of the peaks. It was a ghost from a past storm, a silent promise kept across a decade of rugged wilderness. 10 years earlier, the very same peaks had been shrouded in an unforgiving tempest, a maelstrom of wind and ice that ripped through the landscape like a hungry beast. In the heart of that chaos, a frantic rescue was unfolding, far from the eyes of the world. It was a time when the mountains themselves seemed to conspire against life, a test of wills that would forge an extraordinary bond. Sarah, a young American conservationist, had always felt the wild call of nature. Her childhood, spent exploring the dense forests of her grandparents' sprawling property, had instilled in her an unshakable reverence for the natural world. This innate connection, coupled with a fiercely empathetic spirit, had led her to dedicate her life to wildlife, particularly the enigmatic and often misunderstood big cats. She worked tirelessly at a remote wildlife rehabilitation center nestled deep within the forbidding African mountains, a sanctuary for injured and orphaned animals, a beacon of hope in a land of breathtaking beauty and harsh realities. She believed deeply in making a tangible difference, one claw, one paw, one life at a time, driven by a quiet conviction that every creature deserved a chance. Her world, usually a symphony of chirping insects and distant animal calls, was abruptly silenced by the sudden, brutal arrival of a severe mountain storm. It wasn't just a storm. It was a force of nature intent on isolation. Within hours, the center was cut off. Communication lines went dead. Roads became impassable rivers of mud and rock, and the outside world ceased to exist. External help was an impossibility, a distant dream swallowed by the raging winds. The small team hunkered down, bracing for the worst, their resources limited, their anxieties high. Then, through the crackling static of a barely functional emergency radio, a faint, desperate call reached them. Amidst the chaos and the deafening roar of the storm, a single, harrowing piece of information cut through the noise. A leopard cub, tiny and vulnerable, had been separated from its mother. The message painted a terrifying picture. A terrified infant, alone, lost, and exposed to the full fury of the mountain storm. Sarah's heart seized. The image of a helpless cub, shivering and crying amidst the icy gale, ignited a familiar fire within her. Every fiber of her being screamed to act, to push past the impossible odds. The rational part of her knew the dangers, the sheer insanity of venturing out into such a tempest. But the conservationist in her, the woman who had dedicated her life to protecting these magnificent creatures, knew she had no other choice. A life hung in the balance, a small, fragile pulse flickering against the backdrop of an indifferent, raging wilderness. The call wasn't just a message, it was a summons to destiny, a profound challenge that would redefine her understanding of courage and connection. Before we delve deeper into Sarah's extraordinary journey and the incredible bond she forged, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more remarkable true stories of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable spirit of the wild. The mountain storm, a furious behemoth, had truly unleashed its wrath. Sarah stood at the edge of the rehabilitation center's protective overhang, the wind whipping her hair across her face, stinging her eyes with icy needles of rain. The very air thrummed with a raw, untamed energy that spoke of imminent danger. She knew venturing out was reckless, perhaps even suicidal, but the image of that lost cub, shivering and alone somewhere in the unforgiving wilderness, clawed at her heart. The radio was dead, the path back to civilization swallowed by landslides, and the only certainty was that no one else was coming. This was her fight, and hers alone. Donning her most robust waterproof gear, securing her emergency kit, and double-checking her headlamp, Sarah took a deep breath that tasted of ozone and damp earth. Every instinct screamed caution, every rational thought urged her to wait, but the cub's cries, though unheard, echoed in her mind. Stepping out into the maelstrom, she immediately felt the mountain's icy grip. The familiar trail, usually a clear path, was a treacherous ribbon of mud and loose rock, obscured by a swirling curtain of rain and fog. Each step was a calculated risk, a gamble against gravity and the mountain's relentless assault. The storm itself felt like a living entity, an antagonist with an agenda. It wasn't just weather. It was a deliberate force, pushing against her, trying to break her will. Gusts of wind, powerful enough to fell trees, threatened to sweep her off her feet, while torrents of water created instant rivers where only dry creek beds had been moments before. She saw newly formed waterfalls cascading down sheer rock faces, their thundering roar adding to the terrifying symphony of the storm. The temperature plummeted with alarming speed, her fingers growing numb inside her gloves, her face aching from the cold. Beyond the immediate threat of the elements, the mountain held other more insidious perils. The ground beneath her felt unstable, the earth groaning from the deluge. The constant threat of falling rocks was omnipresent. She dodged several small cascades of pebbles and mud, each close call sending a jolt of adrenaline through her system. The thought of encountering other distressed wildlife, perhaps a territorial male leopard or a cornered buffalo, also flickered through her mind, a somber reminder of the raw hierarchy of the wild in such extreme conditions. Yet, she pushed on, her resolve hardening with every painful step. Her extensive tracking experience became her lifeline. She scanned the treacherous terrain with an almost obsessive focus, searching for any sign, any indication of the cub's passage. The faintest hint of a paw print in a patch of less saturated mud, a disturbed leaf, a broken twig. She absorbed every detail, meticulously piecing together the cub's desperate journey. The tracks were sporadic, often washed away by the relentless rain, but with a hunter's patience and a rescuer's burning hope, she managed to reconstruct a fragmented trail leading upwards, deeper into the storm-ravaged peaks. The effort was immense, both physically and emotionally. Her muscles screamed in protest, her lungs burned with the cold air, and exhaustion gnawed at her resolve. Doubt, a venomous whisper, tried to creep into her mind, questioning the wisdom of her quest. What if she was too late? What if the cub had already succumbed to the elements or fallen prey to another predator? But she ruthlessly pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on the immediate task, one foot in front of the other, one more track to find, one more ridge to conquer. The cub was out there, and she was coming. The relentless pursuit was her only option, her only solace. The faint, barely discernible imprints in the slushy ground were her compass, guiding her through the deafening roar and blinding fury of the storm. She followed them with unwavering determination, a single beacon of hope in a world consumed by chaos. The biting wind tore at Sarah's clothes, a relentless sculptor of ice and fear. Her muscles screamed in protest, each step an agony on the slick, treacherous path. The faint tracks had grown even fainter, almost swallowed by the accumulating snow and mud. Despair began to gnaw at the edges of her resolve, a chilling echo of the storm's fury. Had she pushed too far? Was the cub already lost to the unforgiving mountains? Just as the thought threatened to overwhelm her, a sound, so faint it could have been merely the wind, reached her ears. A weak, high-pitched whimper. Her heart leaped, a sudden surge of adrenaline pushing aside the exhaustion. She scrambled over a slick boulder, her headlamp beam cutting a frantic arc through the swirling snow. There, barely visible beneath a tangle of fallen branches, was a small, huddled form. It was indeed a leopard cub, no bigger than a large house cat, its fur matted with snow and dirt, its tiny body trembling uncontrollably. It lay partially pinned by a heavy, broken tree branch, the weight clearly causing it immense distress. A wave of profound relief, sharp and potent, washed over Sarah, quickly followed by a fresh surge of urgency. The cub was alive, but barely. Its whimpers were pitifully soft, each one a testament to its suffering and fear. Its eyes, wide and luminous even in the dim light, were filled with a raw, primal terror as it saw her approaching. It let out a small, guttural growl, a brave but futile attempt at defiance from such a tiny creature. Sarah moved with careful deliberation, her conservationist instincts overriding her own pain. She knew one wrong move could send the cub into a panic, potentially worsening its injuries or causing it to bolt into the deeper wilderness. She knelt slowly, talking in a low, soothing voice, her words swallowed by the roar of the wind, but her tone conveying an undeniable gentleness. The cub watched her, frozen, its fear warring with its obvious agony. With practiced efficiency, Sarah assessed the situation. The branch was heavy, but not impossibly so. She braced herself, gritting her teeth against the cold and her own fatigue, and began to lift. Muscles strained, tendons stretched, but with a grunt, she managed to shift the weight just enough for the cub to wriggle free. It cried out, a sharp, pained yelp, as it pulled itself from beneath the branch, favoring its left front paw. As it stumbled free, it tried to scramble away, but its injured paw gave out, sending it tumbling weakly into the snow. Sarah moved instantly, not to grab it, but to shield it from the biting wind with her own body. She pulled a thermal blanket from her pack, a last-ditch effort to provide some warmth, and gently draped it over the shaking cub. She didn't try to touch it immediately, instead allowing it a moment to process. Slowly, carefully, she extended a gloved hand, offering it not as a threat, but as a source of warmth. The cub flinched, but the cold was relentless, and the offered heat was a powerful draw. Tentatively, it leaned into her hand, its tiny body trembling still, but less violently. A silent understanding passed between them. In that brutal, unforgiving wilderness, Sarah was its only hope. The fear in its eyes began to recede, replaced by an almost imperceptible spark of trust. As the snow intensified, swirling around them in a blinding vortex, Sarah knew they couldn't stay. She gently scooped the cub into her arms, cradling it against her chest inside her thermal jacket, providing what little body heat she could spare. The cub, surprisingly, didn't struggle. It nestled in, its small head tucked beneath her chin, its soft fur a startling contrast to the harsh environment. In that moment, a profound, almost spiritual bond was forged, a silent promise of protection offered and accepted. This helpless, shivering creature facing death in the storm had reached into her soul and pulled something ancient and powerful to the surface. She looked down at its tiny, vulnerable form, a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. Khepri, she whispered, the ancient Egyptian word for rising sun forming on her lips, a name imbued with the promise of renewal and a new beginning. She knew, with unwavering certainty, that she would get them both back to safety. With Khepri safely nestled against her, Sarah began the arduous journey back to the isolated rehabilitation center. Each step was a battle against the elements, the deep snow trying to swallow her legs, the icy wind threatening to tear the precious cub from her grasp. She moved with renewed purpose, the tiny bundle of warmth against her chest fueling her determination. The return trip was agonizingly slow, her body protesting every movement, but the thought of Khepri's survival pushed her onward. Finally, hours later, as the first weak rays of a storm-broken dawn painted the sky, she stumbled through the center's gate, utterly exhausted, but triumphant. Inside, the meager resources of the storm-battered center were immediately put to use. Khepri was carefully examined, his injured paw bandaged, and warmth was provided in a makeshift enclosure. He was weak, barely touching the specialized milk Sarah painstakingly prepared for him. The initial days were touch and go, a constant vigil against the lingering effects of exposure and shock. Sarah rarely left his side, monitoring his breathing, encouraging him to eat, and gently stroking his soft fur. The lack of electricity meant relying on a generator for essential medical equipment and a small wood-burning stove for warmth, a stark reminder of their isolation. Food was rationed amongst the staff, but Khepri's needs were paramount. Slowly, painstakingly, Khepri began to recover. The initial fear in his eyes gave way to curiosity, then to an almost demanding affection towards Sarah. Their bond, forged in the crucible of the storm, deepened with every passing hour. Sarah spent countless hours with him, not just feeding and cleaning, but observing, learning his unique behaviors, his playful quirks, and his moments of deep slumber. She understood the delicate balance required, nurturing him back to health while resisting the urge to domesticate him. Khepri needed to be wild to retain his inherent instincts. As Khepri grew stronger, Sarah initiated a rigorous program designed to prepare him for eventual release. She encouraged his natural hunting instincts, providing him with enrichment toys and hiding his food to simulate foraging. She taught him to recognize the scent of potential prey and to sharpen his reflexes through play. Every interaction, every lesson, was aimed at honing the skills he would need to survive independently in the harsh African wilderness. She observed his developing strength, the graceful power already evident in his growing limbs, and the keen intelligence shining from his golden eyes. There were moments of pure joy, like watching him chase a rolling ball or stalk a flapping leaf, and moments of quiet contemplation as she imagined his future as a magnificent predator. Meanwhile, communication with the outside world slowly flickered back to life. As satellite phones and temporary radio links were restored, news of Sarah's daring rescue and Khepri's survival spread. While colleagues expressed their relief and admiration for her bravery, a subtle undercurrent of concern also emerged. Seasoned conservationists, though sympathetic, voiced their apprehensions about the growing attachment between Sarah and the cub. The risk of human imprinting, of Khepri losing his essential wildness, was a constant topic of discussion. Sarah understood their concerns. She herself wrestled with the emotional tightrope she walked daily. She knew her paramount duty was to Khepri's wild future, even if it meant a heartbreaking separation down the line. She often found herself staring at the distant mountains, imagining Khepri, strong and free, roaming those peaks. It was a future she was fiercely determined to secure for him, no matter the personal cost. The weight of that eventual departure already pressed upon her heart, a bittersweet premonition that shadowed their every playful interaction and every quiet moment of shared companionship. The journey back to the rehabilitation center had been arduous, but Khepri, wrapped securely against Sarah's body, had remarkably survived the ordeal. His recovery was steady, a testament to his innate resilience and Sarah's tireless dedication. Months transformed into a year, punctuated by Khepri's playful antics and growing strength. His spots, once faint, now stood out in stark contrast against his golden fur. His lean frame had filled out, muscles rippling beneath his coat with every graceful movement. He was a magnificent animal, a wild spirit contained for a time within the secure enclosures of the center. Sarah had watched him with a mixture of pride and a growing ache in her heart, knowing that the time for his release was fast approaching. The day finally arrived, a crisp morning bathed in the golden light of the African sun, a stark contrast to the storm that had first brought them together. It was a bittersweet moment, this release. Every fiber of Sarah's being wanted to prolong their time together, to keep him safe within the confines of her care, yet her conservationist principles, her deep respect for the wild, demanded his freedom. She had spent countless hours ensuring he retained his natural instincts, minimizing human interaction where possible, teaching him to hunt, to fear, to survive. Khepri had been raised without ever seeing his mother, leaving Sarah with the monumental task of instilling within him all the knowledge a wild leopard needed. He was ready. With a heavy heart, Sarah opened the gate to his enclosure. Khepri paused, sniffing the air, his ears twitching as he took in the familiar scents of the mountains, now unbound by wire mesh. He looked back at Sarah, a long, intelligent gaze that seemed to hold a flicker of understanding, a question, perhaps even a farewell. Sarah swallowed hard, tears pricking at her eyes, but she held his gaze, offering a silent nod. This was right. This was what he was born for. With a powerful, fluid movement, Khepri slipped through the opening. He didn't bolt, nor did he hesitate for long. He moved with a cautious grace, a natural predator returning to his domain. He explored the immediate surroundings, sniffing at the familiar scrub, rubbing his flank against a tree he'd seen through the fence 1,000 times. Sarah watched from a distance, hidden behind a cluster of rocks, her heart a tangled knot of hope and sorrow. He was free. He walked with an undeniable confidence now, a true king surveying his kingdom. His tail swayed gently, a rhythmic pendulum against the backdrop of the rugged landscape. He disappeared into the dense foliage, a flicker of spotted fur fading into the dappled light. Sarah stayed there for a long time, listening to the sounds of the mountains, hoping for a sign, a confirmation that he was truly back where he belonged. The silence that followed his departure was profound, a void where his vibrant presence had been. It was a silence that spoke of independence, of a successful return to the wilderness. In the years that followed, Sarah continued her vital work at the rehabilitation center, her dedication unwavering. The memory of Khepri, however, remained a profound part of her. She would often find herself scanning the distant ridges, listening for specific calls, always with a quiet hope. Occasionally there would be signs, a larger than usual paw print near a water source, a distinctive scrape on a tree that matched Khepri's growing claws, or a distant, resonant roar that vibrated through the valleys, carrying with it a powerful echo of his presence. These were not direct encounters, but subtle acknowledgments, whispers from the wild that he was not only surviving, but thriving. Each sign was a silent reassurance, a confirmation of their unique and enduring connection, a testament to the wild heart she had helped to mend and return to its rightful place. 10 years later, the whisper of Khepri's name had become a cherished memory for Sarah, woven into the fabric of her life. The small, isolated rehabilitation center in the African mountains had blossomed under her tireless dedication. No longer a transient outpost, it was now a formidable hub for conservation, safeguarding a sprawling sanctuary that had grown exponentially. Sarah, once a passionate young conservationist, had matured into a seasoned expert, her hands calloused by years of demanding work, her eyes holding the wisdom of countless encounters with Africa's magnificent, often brutal, wilderness. Her life was inextricably linked to the pulse of the mountains, dedicated entirely to protecting its myriad inhabitants, the big cats most of all. The challenges, however, had also evolved. The pristine mountain range, once a bastion of untouched nature, now bore the unmistakable scars of increased human activity. Logging roads snaked deeper into previously inaccessible territories, mining operations encroached on critical habitats, and burgeoning human settlements pressed against the sanctuary's borders. These developments brought with them an almost constant tension, a delicate balancing act between human needs and wildlife preservation. Sarah found herself spending more time in community outreach, negotiating with local leaders, and advocating relentlessly for the creatures she championed. The importance of her work and the work of her growing team had never resonated so acutely. Every success was hard-won, every setback a bitter defeat. One recent development, however, cast a particularly dark shadow over the sanctuary and Sarah's usually steadfast resolve. Reports, initially fragmented whispers from local trackers, began to coalesce into a disturbing pattern, an alarming rise in poaching activity. It started with snares found on the periphery, then the grim discovery of smaller antelope carcasses deliberately butchered for bushmeat. But recently, the stakes had escalated dramatically. More sophisticated traps, clearly targeting larger predators, had been discovered within Khepri's known territory, a vast swathe of land that Sarah knew intimately. The thought of Khepri, the cub she had pulled from the jaws of death, now potentially facing such a cruel end, gnawed at her. She often found herself staring out at the distant peaks, a deep furrow etched between her brows, her mind replaying the moment she cradled him, small and fragile, against her chest. The poachers were becoming bolder, their methods more brazen. Her patrols had uncovered evidence of fresh tracks, too many for mere subsistence hunters. This was organized, predatory poaching, driven by the lucrative illegal wildlife trade. The mountain, once a place of refuge, felt increasingly like a battleground. Sarah implemented stricter surveillance, deployed more rangers, and fortified the perimeter, but a sense of unease settled over the center. The sheer scale of the wilderness made comprehensive protection an almost impossible task. Every rustle in the bush, every distant call, now carried an undercurrent of potential danger. She knew Khepri was a magnificent leopard now, a king in his domain. He was cunning, powerful, and instinctually wired for survival. But even the strongest animal was vulnerable to a well-placed snare or a poacher's bullet. The concern for Khepri wasn't just a sentimental attachment, it was a testament to the core of her mission. He represented resilience, the success of their rehabilitation efforts, and the very hope for the leopard population in these mountains. Losing him, or any of his kind, felt like a personal failure, a betrayal of the promise she had made him that brutal, stormy night. The reports continued to filter in, each one a tightening knot in her stomach, each one deepening her determination to confront this new and ominous threat that loomed over her precious wilderness. The escalating poaching threat cast a long, oppressive shadow over the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, but soon a new, more mysterious element began to disrupt the already strained atmosphere. Unexplained disturbances started occurring with increasing frequency, unsettling the staff and sparking hushed conversations among the local trackers. It wasn't the overt violence of poaching, but something far more subtle, almost ethereal. Traps set for small research projects, carefully monitored and GPS tagged, were found sprung or damaged, yet nothing had been caught. It was as if some unseen force was deliberately disarming them. The damage was never enough to suggest human interference, no signs of tools or human footprints, only clean, precise disruptions. Then came the unusual warning calls from other animals. Baboons, typically boisterous and territorial, would suddenly fall silent, their collective unease palpable, before erupting into a frenzy of alarm calls directed not at the usual threats like jackals or eagles, but seemingly at an unidentifiable presence moving through the dense undergrowth. Nocturnal creatures, usually predictable in their foraging patterns, became erratic, their movements suggesting a pervasive sense of caution. Sarah, ever attuned to the nuances of the ecosystem, felt a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just the poachers. Something else was at play, something primal and unseen, orchestrating these minor disruptions and radiating an almost tangible aura of vigilance around the center. One morning, as the first rays of dawn painted the mountain peaks in hues of orange and gold, Sarah embarked on her routine perimeter check, her breath misting in the crisp air. The ground was still damp from an overnight drizzle, perfect for tracking. Her eyes, honed from decades of wilderness observation, immediately snagged on something unusual near the western fence line, a section bordering a particularly dense portion of the forest. Embedded clearly in the soft earth were footprints unlike any she had seen recently. They were undeniably feline, but their size— they were enormous, far larger than any of the resident wildcats, or even the occasional transient leopard known to pass through. The pads were wide, the claw marks deep and distinct, speaking of immense power and a stealthy gait. A feeling, a memory, stirred within her, a profound sense of familiarity that sent a shiver down her spine despite the warming sun. Her heart began to pound a slow, rhythmic drum against her ribs. She crouched, tracing the outline of the print with a gloved finger. These weren't just large, they were unmistakably unique, mirroring a pattern she knew intimately from a decade ago. It was the print of Kepri, larger and more defined, but undeniably his. The old familiar ache of longing and pride resurfaced, mingled now with an urgent curiosity. Why was he so close to the center? And what did these unexplained disturbances have to do with his presence? Driven by a powerful, almost magnetic pull, Sarah began to follow the tracks, moving slowly and deliberately, her gaze sweeping the terrain. The prints led her away from the fence, deeper into the thick forest, weaving through ancient trees and underbrush so dense it swallowed sound. She moved with the quiet grace of a seasoned tracker, her senses heightened, every rustle and snap of a twig registering in her mind. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a short distance, she paused, her breath catching in her throat. There, on a rocky outcrop overlooking a small clearing, was Kepri. He was a magnificent adult, his coat a symphony of rosettes camouflaged perfectly against the dappled sunlight and shadow. His eyes, the same piercing green she remembered, held an intelligence and depth that stole her breath away. He wasn't just observing the center, he was watching it with an almost proprietary air, a silent sentinel. And then, the revelation. Khepri wasn't alone. From behind him, two small, spotted forms cautiously emerged, their movements hesitant, yet undeniably confident. Two healthy cubs, smaller replicas of their father, playful and curious, yet instinctively staying close to the powerful male. A wave of overwhelming emotion washed over Sarah. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. Khepri, the small, shivering cub she had rescued from the jaws of a storm, had not only survived, but thrived. He had found a mate, built a family. His return, with his offspring in tow, was a powerful, silent acknowledgement of their past bond, a testament to his successful reintegration into the wild, and a profound symbol of nature's incredible resilience. He was showing her his legacy, his continuing lineage. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph, a validation of every struggle, every sacrifice, every hopeful prayer she had uttered a decade ago. The silent recognition exchanged between Sarah and Khepri was profound, a wordless conversation spanning a decade of shared history. It wasn't just a fleeting glance. Khepri held her gaze with an intensity that spoke volumes, a depth of understanding that transcended species. He wasn't merely visiting, he was presenting, showcasing the very essence of what she had helped preserve. His two cubs, miniature versions of his magnificent self, frolicked nervously at his side, occasionally darting curious glances towards Sarah before retreating behind their father's protective frame. It was a tableau of triumph, a living testament to the wild's enduring power and the delicate balance of life Sarah had dedicated her existence to protect. Khepri's decision to bring his family so close to the center was more than a gesture of familiarity. It was a powerful act of trust, an affirmation of his enduring bond with the woman who had saved him. His presence, and that of his offspring, began to subtly reshape the dynamics of the surrounding territory. The unspoken legend of the magnificent leopard who occasionally graced the outskirts of the human sanctuary spread quickly among the local communities and, crucially, among those who sought to exploit the wilderness. Khepri, having grown up observing human patterns from a distance, understood the rhythms of their movements, the sounds of their vehicles, and the boundaries they respected, or sometimes transgressed. He was, in essence, becoming a living guardian, his very presence acting as a natural, formidable deterrent to poachers. When ranger patrols found tampered snares abandoned or saw fresh poacher tracks suddenly veer off course, they attributed it to increased vigilance, to the strategic placement of their surveillance. But Sarah knew better. She had seen the fresh, massive paw prints near those abandoned traps, prints leading directly into paths known only to a seasoned leopard. Khepri had learned not just to survive, but to thrive. And in doing so, he had woven himself into the protective fabric of the very place that had once nurtured him. He was a sentinel, an apex predator whose intimate knowledge of the terrain and its two-legged inhabitants made him an unpredictable, dangerous obstacle to anyone daring to threaten his domain. This profound realization settled over Sarah like a warm, reassuring cloak. Khepri's return wasn't a temporary visit, a mere nostalgic detour. It was a profound reaffirmation of their unbreakable bond, a living, breathing testament to the success of her life's work. The wild, she understood with crystal clarity, did not forget acts of kindness, nor did it relinquish its deepest connections easily. The small, vulnerable cub she had cradled during a furious storm had evolved into a magnificent patriarch, proudly leading a new generation, a symbol of hope and resilience. Every scar on his powerful frame, Every glint in his intelligent eyes told a story of survival, of cunning, and of an enduring spirit shaped by the crucible of the wild. The emotional weight of that moment, watching Capri and his cubs disappear back into the dappled light of the forest, was immense. It was the culmination of years of tireless effort, of heartbreaking losses and exhilarating triumphs. It was proof that conservation wasn't just about protection, but about fostering a connection, about understanding the intricate dance between humanity and the natural world. This extraordinary tale of Capri, the leopard who returned with his cubs, serves as a powerful reminder of the incredible potential for human-animal connection when respect and empathy guide our actions. It underscores the vital importance of protecting our endangered species, not just for their survival, but for the enrichment they bring to our own lives and the delicate balance of our planet. If Capri's story has moved you, if it has ignited a spark of hope or deepened your appreciation for the wild, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below. Your engagement helps us reach more people and continue sharing these incredible true stories of animal rescues, human dedication, and the breathtaking beauty of the natural world. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video, where we explore another astonishing tale of courage and connection in the animal kingdom. Together, we can make a difference.